Morena koutou, and welcome to today's workshop. Before we start, a reminder that this workshop is being recorded. However, while this workshop is open to the public, it is for staff to provide guidance to members, not a forum for debate or decisions. It is also not a forum for the public to provide input into decisions or bring other matters to the attention of council. If a member of the public does want to do this, please talk to staff who will help you have your say. And a couple of apologies from Councillor Goff, Councillor Scandrick, and Councillor Fields is attending on Teams online. So the first one we've got off today is council submission for Going for Housing Growth proposal. Helena and Ike are here to discuss their submission on what we're going to do. Welcome.
Elder, thank you. So the purpose of today is to introduce you to the Going for Housing Growth Pillar 1 proposals. We're going to outline the proposed draft council submission key points, as well as seek your feedback on these. Before we get into the details of the proposals, we wanted to highlight where this package sits within the broader RM reform. As you'll be aware, the government has been consulting on proposals to change and inform development of national direction under the RMA. Packages 1 to 3 were released earlier and recover a raft of changes to national direction. Package 4, which we'll be discussing today, is the final part of those national direction proposals for phase 2. Hopefully this diagram illustrates packages 1 to 3 and then the package 4 that we'll be discussing today. For package 4, this package, the government is seeking early feedback on Pillar 1 proposals for Going for Housing Growth. This is to help inform the direction for phase 3. So that will be the replacement RMA bill. So the Planning Act and the Natural Environment Bill. Similar to the freshwater package, so the package 3, there will be another opportunity to provide feedback into these proposals, likely when the replacement bills are released. So this is our first opportunity to provide comment on these. So firstly, what is the Going for Housing Growth program? The program is part of the government's broader plan to address New Zealand's housing shortage. The program has been structured around 3 pillars, which are on screen. Package 4, which is the package we're discussing today, is focused on Pillar 1, which is freeing up land for urban development. It's made up of 6 key components, which are listed under Pillar 1, and Ike will be discussing some of these shortly. Pillar 2 is about improving infrastructure funding and financing settings to help get more housing built. While we've yet to see the details of Pillar 2, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 are intended to work together. So, for example, Pillar 1 involves freeing up more land for development, while Pillar 2 intends to make it easier to provide infrastructure to support that development. The Minister has recently announced that the first 2 components of Pillar 2 are expected to be announced in November this year. At this stage, we have limited details on Pillar 3, but we expect further details on this towards the end of the year. I'll pass over to Ike.
Thank you, Lena. So we thought we'd cover off some of the key matters we wanted to highlight to Council in terms of the proposal for Going for Housing Growth. One of the first is focusing on housing growth targets. So at the moment in the National Policy Statement for Urban Development, we are required to facilitate housing for the next 30 years. That is based on our projected growth from Stats NZ, plus a contingency on top of that. So the existing criteria, as it currently stands today, means that we need to provide for 32,000 odd households. The proposed criteria is to change that to only focus on a high growth scenario, plus a 20% contingency. And as you can see there in that illustration, that extends it to about 65,600, more than doubling the requirement in terms of what we need to be sufficient for housing. That all must be zoned immediately. That's quite different to the current NPSUD. We need to zone, in terms of live zone, the next 10 years. This is the next 30 at a high growth plus 20%. If you equate that to what is actually projected over that 30 years, that equates to about 71 years of actual projected growth that we need to enable in terms of zoning. There's also a new lens, if you will, for larger spatial planning, which they're proposing at 50 years. However, that 30 to 50 year buffer, if you will, is really focused on infrastructure delivery at this stage. In terms of intensification, you'll be aware, no doubt, with the MPSUD, the Policy 3 direction for within and around commercial centres. They are proposing to modify this fairly substantively, focusing on intensification primarily around public transport stops. And so this comes off the back of making MDRS optional. So the direction within the Act would be removed through the forthcoming RM bill, and instead medium density will be focused within, or was proposed to be focused within either a 400 or 600 metre walking catchment from all high frequency bus routes. In addition to that, there's also higher importance, if you will, corridors, the spine corridors, and they propose to require enablement of at least 6 stories within those corridors, and they're highlighted in that shaded colour on this image as well. The government, through this, has expressed a fair amount of frustration through the intensification plan changes that are happening nationally in terms of debate around various catchments and the like, and they're seeking to standardise that as part of this overall direction. And it also includes high density of at least 6 stories within 1.2 to 1.5 kilometres of the central city. In addition to that, they have also said that across urban residential areas, there should be a lower level of mixed use, local dairies and the like, that would be enabled, and then a greater level of mixed use around key commercial centres as well, so smaller metropolitan supermarkets and the like as well. In terms of some of that wider growth beyond urban limits, the Going for Housing Growth proposal is to remove so-called rural-urban boundaries, what the government calls urban containment, and so the ability to expand outwards. It doesn't mean to rezone existing rural areas. It simply means that if there is pressure to go outwards, there is no limitations on doing that. In that same vein, there's also a freeing up of private plan change requests as well, when that enables significant housing growth as well. And so that can be seen together in terms of the freeing up on the fringe, as well as the private plan change areas as well. Like I said, the change to Policy 3 potentially means that there is a move away from intensification within and around those commercial centres, and instead it is proposing to focus on how the MPCD was originally, which was to simply say where it's highly accessible to a variety of different services, or where housing demand is very high, that's where the greatest level of intensification should be directed, rather than specifying those commercial centres as well. And in terms of how this is going to be applied, a lot of the proposals that are discussion document are focused on the new RMA framework and about how this will apply within that. The new RMA framework is, or it's not called the RMA, the new Planning Act framework is going to be is proposed to be far more centralised and to set nationally consistent zones, definitions, objectives, policies, the full framework. Effectively, what seems to be directed through this proposal is to say that the current criteria, if you will, for intensification that we find ourselves in within the National Policy Development Policy 3 criteria, walking catchments and the like, that will be translated into a criteria for when you must apply a certain zone. And so it seems to be a short-circuiting of plan changes in the future. So think about rather than doing, we've gone through plan change 14, simply going, great, we've got this list of zones, what meets that criteria in terms of which catchments, we simply just have to apply that zone. That detail will come later on through phase 3, but at this stage, that seems to be the way the government's heading.
Thanks, Zach. So now turning to our draft council submission. In terms of overall feedback, there are a number of components that we see as beneficial for managing growth, and I'll discuss those shortly on the next slide. We do see that any future system needs to minimise additional fiscal burdens for council, particularly regarding infrastructure planning and investment for unplanned development or out of sequence growth. And similar to our submission on packages 1 to 3, we again acknowledge the limitations given that we don't know what's upcoming in the new RM replacements. So turning to those benefits, so what do we see could be beneficial from the proposals put forward? We support the changes to spatial planning, provided that there's flexibility for councils to address local issues. We also agree that spatial plans should carry greater weight in land use and regulatory decisions than they currently do. We see this as a positive change, offering clearer direction and greater certainty to councils, developers and communities. In terms of the integrated approach, we support changes to better enable integration between land use planning and infrastructure planning and investment. We see this as a significant opportunity to more strategically coordinate the two, with spatial plans being the appropriate mechanism for that. In terms of what Ike was speaking to around intensification in the right places, we are supportive of planning for high-level growth of housing in Christchurch, but we do see that growth needs to be managed strategically to limit the risk of uncosted and ad hoc growth. Given this, we're supportive of proposals to enable intensification around key transport corridors. This is consistent with Council's strategic direction within the Christchurch District Plan and the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan. While we support the intensification around strategic corridors, as Ike was speaking to, we do caution against proposals to move away from the commercial centre hierarchy and recommend retaining the current approach to this. So in terms of turning to our key submission points, while we're supportive of enabling high growth for housing, we are concerned about the financial costs that may arise from enabling out of sequence development or unplanned growth. To minimise the additional fiscal burdens on councils, we recommend that mechanisms are needed to limit unanticipated development and ensure that the implementation of spatial plans and the delivery of planned and already funded infrastructure are not negatively impacted by the costs of unplanned growth. In terms of growth paying for growth, so the second point there, we see that the integration of the Going for Housing Growth program with the design of the new resource management system presents an opportunity to consider how best to enact the growth pays for growth direction. We would like to see that the government consider how the new development levy system, so that's the Pillar 2, can be designed in a way that allows councils to receive revenue in a timely and responsive way. The third point there, housing supply and housing quality. This relates to, while we agree that housing supply is critical for addressing housing affordability, increasing supply has the potential to be at the expense of good housing outcomes. So we see that basic housing needs such as access to sunlight and things like that still need to be achieved in the new system. So housing supply is as important as housing policy there. And finally, similar to our submission point on packages 1 to 3, we see that ensuring local voice in any future system is critical. This speaks to what Ike was saying in his points around the potential for greater standardisation in the new system. While it's difficult to comment on this at this stage, given that we haven't seen phase 3 in terms of the replacement legislation, we do think it's important in this submission to reiterate the importance of ensuring for flexibility and ensuring local voice in that new system. So those are the 4 points that I'll outline today. Similar to the submission on packages 1 to 3, we are also providing a detailed appendix to the submission. The detailed appendix will address the specific points that the discussion document has outlined and responding to that. So we're still in the process of working through that, but we wanted to highlight to you what in our submission or draft submission these key points will be. So moving on to next steps in terms of finalising the submission. Following this information session or later today, we'll be circulating the draft submission for your feedback. We will be asking, and apologies for the short turnaround, for feedback to be provided by this Friday. It's just given the time constraints that we're under with it. We will be looking to take the draft submission for your consideration to Council on the 6th of August, with the submission needing to be lodged by Friday the 15th of August. That's all from us, but we're happy to take any questions.
Yes,
Information overload, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. That's good. Andre, first, please.
Thank you. I'm just going to go to slide 7, the refocusing intensification one with the map.
This one? No.
That one. Yeah, at least 6 stories, 1.2. So I'm assuming that's that big circle.
Very roughly, yes.
Very roughly. And but we decided not to mixed use zone SOMO cardinal area. Is this saying that we're going to have to anyway?
Potentially, yeah. So effectively it's saying is that they don't want to have debate around catchments or how it's drawn or like. It's simply saying this is the catchment and this will be applied. Where the mixed use comes in is a little bit unclear, to be honest, in the discussion document. They've said that they want a medium level of mixed use around the likes of city centre. So it could very well end up in that scenario like that.
But the advice we've got is that to enable SOMO, we have to advance an entirely new plan change.
Yeah, and so this might certainly navigate that need.
Okay, so it would be good for any submission of ours to be making mention of that, in my view. As suggestion indicates, maybe we made a not so good decision. We're going to have to anyway, and waste a whole lot of time. But it would, be very good to clarify that one.
Yeah, great.
Tyler, please.
It's sort of in the same line. Referring to pillar 1, it actually talks about the mixed use development, and we approved the DNZ sales yard sites to be residential to 36 metres per million. Is there potential for it to be converted into a mixed use development site after going through this?
The way that it seems to be lining up is to say that if a certain area meets a criteria, then yes, that zoning will change, potentially being to mixed use. Again, this is the double-edged sword, if you will, of standardisation. On one hand, it means really efficient black and white, great zoning. On the other hand, it means potentially quite rigid flexibility in that end. So it remains to be seen in terms of what the criteria is.
Okay, thank you.
And that'll come out.
Sweet.
Gareth?
Yeah, so a couple of issues with the going for growth is the 6 stories and that just doesn't meet reality for 2 reasons. One is it doesn't get any cheaper to go up. Did a Google search. Anything above single level in New Zealand, it is you pay more per square metre. So houses just get dearer the more you go up. So there is no model in this country where you can make cheaper housing going up. So that's one problem we face, unless New Zealanders are suddenly going to get richer. And then the other one is the reality is New Zealanders don't want to live up. Except Andre, but there is a small percentage that do. But even so who's talking to the market saying, look, who really wants to live in boxes on top of each other? And do we have a demand or even try and con them into it? Because we don't seem to be.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point you raised, because it's something that the discussion document.
Because we plan what we want, but if no one actually wants what we're planning for, it brings me to my other point. Why are we not planning for a city of 1 million now, and then going, what does the perfect city of 1 million that sits in this footprint look like, and then start working towards that rather than the piecemeal approach that we seem to do?
To be honest, the piecemeal approach is driven by government. So the PC14 was directed by government. This will be directed by government as well. I mean, the point that you raised around the heights is very much a feature in the discussion document.
It's not affordable. No one wants to do it.
Yeah,
so
there's a specific question around why 4 to 6 stories isn't done. And it's for that reason they're looking to increase the 6-story requirement to be potentially more than 6 stories to make sure it's feasible. And that aligns with the evidence that we had with PC14 that showed around the central city, only at around 12 stories doesn't become feasible, because you've got those sunk costs, if you will, at the lower end. And you start to get those rewards later on. So
and
it's very much
knocking on your door each year saying, hey, we want to do a 12 in town, but you're holding us up. like how many have got one on the cards going, we've got a beautiful 12-story development.
It's more in the commercial, that's for sure. I'm not aware of any residential apartment buildings.
So not one.
No, so more in terms of office space. Yeah.
Right, okay. Yeah, and then the other one is, why do we not plan for the city of 1 million?
Well, that could be a situation.
I mean, the Community Christchurch spatial plan was to plan for two scenarios, one of 70,000 and another scenario of 1 million people. So that planning work did seek to identify capacity to accommodate that number across Greater Christchurch.
But does that rely on all of these 6-story unrealistic developments, or does it rely on something that might actually sell?
I mean, anticipated there'd be greater intensification.
You've come to the right place.
It was anticipated for the spatial plan there'd be greater intensification enabled both within the central city and in and around theatres. It comes down to the scale, the heights that are enabled. Obviously, this direction signals an increase in that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, just a lot of the terminology has been losing me a wee bit, which you're talking pillar one, phasing, all this stuff, but I'm trying to keep up. Am I correct in thinking ad hoc also means unplanned growth? So it's the same thing. And so why do we see this kind of oxymoron thing where they're supporting the catchments around the CBD and spine corridors and transport corridors, but then also supporting unplanned growth? Doesn't make sense to me. How can you have both?
Yeah, and I think that contradiction, if you will, is something, the feature that we've got in our draft submission about outward growth. We'd rather have it being focused on what is planned, spatial planning, and use spatial planning as a tool, like Mark fed through, for example, the Greater Christchurch spatial plan, rather than having this fluidity on the edge. And so that is a contradiction in our mind as well.
Thank you. I thought so. So, and also I think I personally think we should be very strong on protecting our greenfields where possible. So, I mean, in Pillar 1, that's one of the objectives, is enabling greenfield growth. And we know that's more expensive for councils who are trying to keep rates to actually, supply infrastructure for those properties and greenfields. So I think maybe if we reiterate that, would
If they want us to go on, then that's
Apologies, sorry. That also relates to, I guess, this mission point around growth paying for growth. So if we are to enable greenfield development, or there is certain greenfield development that is enabled, we need to ensure that growth pays for growth in the new system so that it doesn't burden council in terms of those additional costs.
Yeah, but then you've got the costs of installation, but you've got whole of life.
Yes, yeah, agreed. Yeah, those additional costs.
Without increasing rates.
Righto, we're moving on. I think we're going good. But please.
Thank you. You mentioned flexibility a couple of times in your presentation. So you're broadly supporting the proposed approach, provided there is some flexibility.
Yeah.
But given that the government is aiming for standardisation and simplification, just help me out here. What do you envisage that flexibility looks like?
It's a great question. The government has signalled, and we don't have the details on phase 3 yet to be able to make specific comments on that, but they have signalled that there may be cases where you can have bespoke rules or certain things enabled in the new system to allow for local context or to allow for that flexibility. But how that works in practice, we don't know yet. So what we want to do in this submission is simply reiterate that, yes, we see there's potential merits of standardisation, but we also see that there needs to be the ability for some discretion or some flexibility. But I guess it's very difficult for us to provide detailed commentary on that until we see the ins and outs or the nuts and bolts of how that's going to work in phase 3. So very good question.
Okay, so the next part then references the Greater Christchurch spatial plan. So I was on that hearing.
Yeah.
Did a lot of work there. You ended up with a great plan. I'm keen to understand now what happens to that and how is that impacted by this, and is it all in the rubbish bin? You have to do it all again. Can you help me with that?
Another really good question.
Again, we don't have the ins and outs of the detail of phase 3, but a preference would be that, particularly say with the Greater Christchurch spatial plan that was only finalised last year, correct me if I'm wrong, finalised last year, that a lot of that material hopefully will be able to transition into the new system or retain, say for the likes of the Greater Christchurch spatial plan. But again, until we see the detail of that,
So can
we do not
force that? Because I understand
We can.
we're one of the regions that first came off the rank in terms of actually getting that spatial plan,
So-
because we're anticipating it was.
Yeah.
So just on that, in terms of the principles, if you will, that the government has said, is that they have principle that everything that's been done under the current system is deemed to have been done under the new system. And spatial planning is a feature of that. So we would
we can
hope
reiterate.
that very much the Greater Christchurch spatial plan is deemed to have been done under the new system and translates over as the roadmap for growth.
Okay, so.
That's what our
Continue that a little bit. Is there anything in the existing spatial plan that is deemed to have been done under the new proposal, which is actually inconsistent with the higher level directives and strategic direction of the current government? Do we know what those areas are? Because one of them to me seems to be the green belt aspect of what we looked at in the spatial plan, and I'm not seeing that in here anywhere. So that seems to me to be quite inconsistent. So you don't want to.
No, I'd say that's probably the standout. We haven't done an evaluation of the whole comparison, but definitely agree with you in terms of the green belt philosophy that's in there. That would be a contrast to where they're going in terms of bringing up the edge. But the rest of that, I'd say, for cursory glance, would be strongly aligned with where government's going.
Okay, so will you be mentioning in the submission the work that we've done on that and some of those inconsistencies?
We can look to include that further within that and raise that if you would like.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
Yeah.
anyone else? I know you can't move on.
And 5 people.
I know, but this is really important stuff. Paying for growth.
Yeah.
We've just been through a huge piece of work around our own DC policy. Can you help me understand now what happens to that in light of what's being proposed here?
It's difficult.
We wasted our time.
It's difficult to comment on that until we see the pillar 2. So apologies for the terminology, but
No concerns.
yeah, and that's what the submission with the growth paying for growth. That's what the submission is doing.
Okay.
With just we are anticipating later in the year proposals for a development levy system that would in time replace development contributions, but we've got little detail on that at the moment.
Okay.
Just briefly on the spatial plan that obviously as Sarah and I were involved in, the spatial plan didn't propose a strict boundary of where urban shouldn't cross. The green belt concept was intended to provide flexibility to enable for some outward growth, but still represents an area that should be at least retained as rural use. Certainly there's other aspects of the spatial plan that we're seeking through the submission, like the reference in the spatial plan to a stronger blue-green network that comes back to the quality of development. That will be a key feature in the submission.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So you've given us the list of what the target capacity is. What is our current capacity for development in the city?
We'll cover that in the next presentation, but at this stage, it doesn't seem likely that we will meet the proposed criteria that's in there for the 65,000, simply because it's doubling the benchmark that's there.
So when we've done PC portrait, we've done a lot of work around the capacity in the zoning. My understanding is we had a surplus of about 30 to 40,000.
Yeah, so the total amount that you're referring to is the zoning of medium density everywhere.
Yeah.
What we're talking about today is the district plan today, when we don't have medium density everywhere. And so in terms of the capacity that generates, our indications is that it doesn't meet that proposed criteria of 65,000, but not by much. There's only a small amount. And for that matter, if we do progress, we'll talk about this in a moment, but if we do progress through the opt-out, we would meet that criteria anyway, because it's the same criteria to opt out. So it's not a concern in terms of meeting that criteria, if that's your question.
Yeah, so I just wanted to check, in terms of the relationship with government, there's a Merrill Fund doing a housing strategy. There's a housing strategy being done through GCP, there's all our land use planning that we're doing, there's council's housing strategy, there's a city deal being put together. How does this all connect in? Because it's become increasingly difficult to understand what the structure is that we'll be negotiating with government over housing in our city.
Yeah, look,
I think
I think at the end of the day, that remains to be seen because they seem to be, building the plane as it's taking off, so to speak.
You didn't put that in.
But with all due respect, like that's kind of what we're doing as well. Because we've got 3 different entities doing planning work for housing, all talking about lobbying, advocating to central government without any understanding at our level about who's actually leading that and doing it. But I have no idea what the miracle is now doing a housing strategy when GCP was supposed to have done one that has been long overdue and still hasn't been.
Yeah.
We'll take an action to do diagrams showing the relationship between different strategies, but worth noting that the Greater Christchurch Joint Housing Action Plan is focused on tools and levers to enable more social and affordable housing. Behind this is a philosophy that if we provide more supply, then housing can become more affordable through.
So my understanding, and maybe in the submission, we have close to the greatest amount of spare capacity in terms of zoning, yet rents in our city have actually been going up, apparently higher than anywhere else. So the capacity that we've got hasn't seemed to make a difference to the waiting lists that are growing and the housing affordability. It'd be really good to have some social impact assessment of understanding the relationship between the two. Because I think that's really a key thing. If government want to bring in these changes, then we should use evidence to show what's actually happening, and we're in a good position to do that because of the spare capacity we've had for a long time. And the other thing is the mixed use. Could we put the pictures of the Fletcher's mixed use on Colombo Street that's still sitting vacant after about 15 years? And so can we actually get some sensible submission points around the ability of mixed use to be utilised and what that also does in local communities in terms of shutting businesses and just having empty floor space sitting there not being used?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sarah.
Thank you. With the plan growth and the ad hoc and sort of private plan changes being enabled, can we please, like Councillor Moore's point earlier, be really clear about giving examples? I think they're really useful because a lot of the people will be reading submissions are not necessarily planning experts like you guys, and having concrete examples is really important. So, for example, the all of the growth in Hallswell at the moment is having a large impact on the amount of cars on the roads coming through Eddington and Ricketta and all of those kind of things. So making sure that we're making that point about the ad hoc development not enabling but the public transport component with it, and the transport stuff needs to be much clearer. We've already got New Zealand's lowest commute, and if we keep spreading out further, all we're going to do is enable more cars clogging up our streets.
And that relates to our point around the spatial planning.
Yeah.
So the ability to take that integrated approach between land use and transport planning through the mechanism of spatial planning will hopefully in the future help to alleviate potentially some of those issues as well.
But what it's sounding like that the government says, you have a spatial plan, but you're going to be able to have a whole pile of ad hoc plan developments,
Yeah.
those things on top of that,
Yeah.
that don't stick to the spatial plan.
Yeah, and it's a
So just being really super clear about giving examples so we can see it's
to illustrate the
those
risks of ad hoc or unplanned development.
yeah.
But also the future cost to council picking up the.
I mean, even just the next 10 years, we're due to grow by the size of Boston, just Christchurch City. And if we do that spread out the way Boston is, what we do is like all the existing neighbourhoods will just be completely clogged up with cars coming in from the suburbs, and our residents won't like that.
Okay. Well, we would have time, but very good questions and very good answers, guys. Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.